Welcome back to chapter 12.2, Finding RF Values that Required Practical. By the end of this video, you will be able to set up the equipment for thin layer chromatography and determine RF values from chromatograms. Let's remember together what is thin layer chromatography. Thin layer chromatography has the abbreviation TLC, where it is a separation technique of identifying chemicals in mixtures, such as colored pigments, in dyes, or drugs. As any chromatography, thin layer chromatography has two phases. A stationary phase, which is in this case a thin piece of unreactive material like glass, which is covered with an absorbent chemical like aluminum oxide or silica. So here is the stationary phase. And we have the mobile phase. And the mobile phase, it's usually the solvent that we are using in the chromatography, and it will be the one which is moving in one direction, of course, up the thin layer. It will be moving upwards. Now, let's examine together setting up the equipment for the thin layer chromatography. Here we're gonna show now an unexperienced scientist who is about to run a TLC, which is a thin layer chromatography, of a material that is insoluble in water. Let's run the experiment together and then see if you can improve it based on the feedback that we will receive at the end. They are using a pen here to point out the spots A, B, and C. They already added the pigment and they're gonna dip it now in the solvent. Look how far is the level of the solvent. At the end, if we use ultraviolet light, we can see that there were none of the spots that have separated at all. Now, let's run again the experiment by changing some of the conditions that we have used in the previous run. Let's see the second run together and how the results will change. We are using a pencil to spot the spots. Now we are adding the ink. Look at the level of the solvent, how small it is. Also, we close the beaker. Now we press on the filter paper to get the spots that we want. Look how the pigments were separated, each at a different distance from the other. So after running the experiment by changing some of the conditions, we can see that now the experiment is well done and the conditions are set up in the right way. This means that we have to be careful while running the thin layer chromatography by looking and highlighting some of the things inside the thin layer chromatography. First of all, the solvent that we have used, it should be at a certain level. The solvent level must be below the line on which the samples are spotted. So the line that we have drawn here, which includes A, B, and C, the solvent should be below this line. And one more thing, the solvent should be an organic sample which is less polar than water, and so it dissolves better in organic solvents such as ethyl acetate. So we use a non-polar solvent. Next, if we want to draw the line, we have to draw it in a pencil, and you should never use a pen because a pen includes ink and the ink will undergo chromatography. It will separate as any other pigment throughout the chromatography, so you will not be able to distinguish the components of the dots that you added from that of the ink. Another thing to pay attention for are the spots. The spots themselves. If the spots are too close, they will start to merge as the spots diffuse and grow as they travel up the plate. So that's why we shouldn't put the spots close to each other like they did at the first run. And we should put them like that, leaving short distances between them as you can see here. Another thing to be careful about is that we should run the thin layer chromatography until the solvent has almost reached the top of the plate here. This will ensure you minimize error in measuring the distance traveled by the solvent front and the sample spots. So we should always wait until the solvent reaches this line and we should stop. We should never wait until it reaches the top. One more thing is that you must remove the plate from the solvent before it reaches the top of the plate. So as we said before, we should wait until it reaches here before it reaches the top of the plate. Whenever we see it reach this line, then we directly remove the plate and put it in another empty beaker and let it dry. And the last important thing, it is that we have to always provide an atmosphere that is saturated with solvent vapor. And what do we mean by that? It means that we should close the beaker as much as we can. And in this way, we prevent the plate from drying out. And this is important in order to get a clear and nice results.